All right, we're gonna let people in.
Hi, Kari. Sorry I was late.
That's okay. You're here now. That's all that matters. Whoops, I gotta go back. Ah. Hi, everyone. We're gonna give it a few minutes for folks to hop in, and then we'll get started.
Hi, Allison. How are you?
I'm good. I'm trying to find all my screens, which one does which at this point. How was your trip?
Which trip was that? I've lost track of things.
I think you went to Seattle.
Oh, yes. I did go to Seattle. It was wonderful. I saw, we had a good time.
Good.
Kind of a family get together.
Not a bad place to do it.
All right, while we're waiting for everybody to hop on, just want to welcome everybody. We had a pretty large number of folks that registered, so we're going to just give it a minute for everybody to get on, and then we'll get started. So we're looking forward to this conversation today. And why don't we just go ahead and get started? I am Carrie Carney with 1000 Friends of Iowa. Welcome to our EV Ready Communities webinar. This is one of a series of webinars targeted at city staff and planners. I'm going to turn it over to the meeting is co-hosted by 1000 Friends of Iowa, the Des Moines Area MPO, Clean Energy Districts of Iowa, the Great Plains Institute, and APA of Iowa. And I'm going to turn it over to Allison Van Pelt to introduce our speakers, and we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. Like Carrie said, welcome. We're so happy to have you with us today. This is one in a series of collaborations about sustainability at the city level. So we're happy to see you. Again, like Carrie said, thanks to our sponsors, Clean Energy Districts, Great Plains Institute, 1000 Friends, APA Iowa, and the Des Moines Area MPO. I just want to give a little plug to the APA Climate Champions program real quick at the top. Brian and myself are the champions for Iowa and Minnesota. And so trying to uplift these messages of how we can become more resilient, sustainable overall as we deal with the changing climate. So if you are interested, there are more resources and information about the program at apascd.com. Please do check that out. There's development review checklists and a number of other resources there for you. So we're so happy to have our experts on the call today. First, we're going to hear from Brian Ross at Great Plains Institute. Then we'll hear from Jolene Jensen of the Clayton County Energy Districts and Clean Energy Districts of Iowa. And then we'll wrap it up with MK Anderson of the Iowa Economic Development Authority. So Brian, if you're ready, I'll hand it off to you.
All right. Thank you, Allison and Kari. I will share my screen if I can find the right places. There, does everybody see that?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a program that Great Plains Institute is piloted in Minnesota, but also in a few other places around the country, called the EV Ready Certification Program. EV Ready Communities program. It is something we've been working on for a number of years about how local governments can become a vector for change in the transportation sector for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and meeting our carbon goals. But also kind of just to be prepared, kind of future-proof your community for the transformative effects of EV deployment as it ramps up over the next 10 years. The Great Plains Institute, for those of you who are not familiar, is a nonprofit organization. We're based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, but we do have some staff scattered around the country, and we work regionally and nationally to effectively decarbonize the energy system and our economy. We have a number of different programs that we do that through, and we work to decarbonize electricity production, but we also are looking at zero carbon and low carbon fuels, including electricity, to decarbonize the transportation sector, and then looking at things like carbon capture and similar technologies to expand into kind of industrial applications in that decarbonization effort. So I am the vice president of the Renewable Energy Program, and but I'm an urban planner by training and profession, and work across several different areas, including doing our EV work. So the kind of first question that we get asked sometimes, why do an EV Ready Communities program? Why focus on looking at communities to become EV ready? And really what we're trying to get to is that local governments are an essential partner in creating a self-sustaining, economically self-sustaining electric vehicle market. Many people look to kind of state governments and federal governments and electric utilities as being the driver of this change, but local governments are actually an essential partner in that change. And what we want to do is kind of alert local governments and provide them with a pathway to how they can become EV ready. Local governments shape, for instance, how residents and businesses take actions, even where they don't have direct control over it. Local governments are a trusted entity in most cases and can carry messages as well as take direct action on EV readiness. There are existing and familiar tools that local governments already use that can help foster that community transition to electric vehicles. Local governments do land use controls, they do infrastructure development and planning. They own and manage public sites in the communities. They control the public right-of-ways for the most part. There's a shared responsibility, but it's within the jurisdiction. It's usually the local government, and there are existing tools that communities are already using that can be adapted to EV transformation. And so the EV market transformation really requires that the public and private development accommodates EV charging infrastructure. This is the primary way that local governments can kind of foster this transition. There are a variety of tools that we're going to talk about where local governments actually do have regulatory control or decision-making control over what happens in the community in order to kind of make sure that EV charging infrastructure is in place, which is one of the major barriers to EV adoption. Kind of talk a little bit more about those barriers. What we see in the literature, kind of when people look at, excuse me, why do people not adopt EVs, or what are the reasons that they would not go the EV route? And one of the kind of market transformation targets that come out of that research are that the upfront costs are a barrier because EVs are generally going to be somewhat more expensive in the purchase price than not EV barriers. Some of that attention that we want to give to that is the lack of attention to life cycle costs when you're making that purchase. The purchase price may be more, but you have significant savings on both fuel costs and maintenance costs when you purchase EVs in such a way that the life cycle costs are actually lower for most EVs than they are for gasoline equivalents. There is a barrier around the perceived actual or perceived vehicle range. People think I won't be able to make it to work and back on the with the kind of range that you get from an EV. And there are, for some vehicles, some fairly short limitations. I happen to own a first generation Nissan Leaf that only has probably a 85-mile range. And so I'm not going to take it when I go down and visit from Minneapolis, my relatives down in Iowa. But there are other vehicles that have much more extensive range, and there's a lot of opportunities. And most of the trips we do are within that 85-mile range, and we've actually never had to kind of plug in that vehicle in any place other than at the home charger. But then the kind of one of the biggest barriers is the perceived or actual, in some cases, lack of charging infrastructure. This does affect, in particular, some of the rural areas and rural communities that we would see in Iowa and Minnesota. And this is something over which the local government has a great deal of control and can actually make a big difference in terms of kind of how that gets rolled out and to address this particular market barrier. These are some of the three things. And what we have developed is a series of actions, best practices that local governments can take that address all of these three barriers at the local level. This is the kind of matrix that we've come up with for the EV Ready certification program that we're getting ready to launch in Minnesota. It has, and you don't have to kind of digest all of this text here, but we wanted to kind of show you the big categories and some of the things that are within those categories in that program about what kind of best practices and what kind of actions that local governments can take in order to achieve EV readiness. There are across the top there, that top row are categories of actions, so categories of best practices. And those include, and I will go over them here, what local governments can do in regard to policy, goals, and metrics, kind of setting the policy foundation for action. The second column is on regulation. Local government has regulatory authority on a number of different kinds of things for which it is a fairly simple deal to change to accommodate EVs and to encourage EV infrastructure installation. Utility engagement is a key category. Utilities have it in their interests. They would like to see an expansion of EVs in communities, and creating partnerships with utilities is a key pathway to influence and to expand kind of the incentive programs or the education programs that may already be in place with the utilities. And if they aren't in place, then approaching the utilities as a partner is a great way to make a difference. The fourth category is on local education and incentives. Oops, sorry. And this is things besides the utility. There are things that the city itself can do in terms of kind of creating education and incentive programs to encourage EV ownership and to encourage EV infrastructure installation. And we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. It is not necessarily a matter that you have to change your budget to come up with incentives. There are actually existing incentives that can be adopted in most cities to accommodate EVs. And the fifth category is public sector leadership. And this is really where the public entity and the city is looking at its own areas, its own properties, and its own fleet in terms of kind of demonstrating EV ownership. And ultimately, by doing things like electrifying public fleets, bringing down the cost pressure and keeping taxes low by taking advantage of the economic benefits of EVs. And then the final category is shared mobility. And this is where we want to recognize that not everybody has access to a car, and that cities have a variety of different things they can do to kind of extend the EV revolution into other forms of mobility. That includes transit, that includes paratransit, such as rideshare programs or dial-a-ride programs, school buses, and for some communities where there's a sufficient market, things like electric bike and scooter programs that you can take advantage of, and car sharing programs. So I'm going to go a little bit more into detail now on each one of these. The EV goals, policies, and metrics, we have 4 best practices that we have identified here. EVs in the comprehensive plan, in specific area plans, in functional plans like a transportation plan, and then finally making sure that you're establishing benchmarks and deployment goals, and kind of what the actions are within each one of those categories. If you want to address, for instance, the best practice of addressing EVs and EVSE, which is the shorthand that is used in the industry, kind of unfortunate, but basically that's the charging infrastructure. So EV supply equipment. You can adopt policies that support EV market transformation in the public and private sectors in your comprehensive plan. In your plan, you can actually set deployment goals for the entire community or for market subsets. For instance, you want to make sure that commercial entities are getting to a certain level of penetration in electric vehicles locally. And then finally, you can set equity goals for EV access or deployment to make sure that all members of your community have some access, and there are tools to achieve those things in the private sector. So that's just kind of some specific actions that we look to and that we've actually seen implemented by different kinds of communities in our scan across the nation of what people have done in a comprehensive plan. And there's similar kind of sets of actions for each one of these other best practices. On the regulatory question, the one I wanted to focus on is the action of, or the best practice of, enabling EV and EV charging equipment in your land use regulations. It can be as simple as making sure that your land use controls actually include as a permitted accessory use level 2 chargers in all parking lots in all zoning districts, because these are things that are going to be installed outside. And just for clarity's sake, to make sure that you have enabled that as an allowed accessory use. Similarly, there's level 3 chargers, which is the fast charger, to look at where you want to put those and where you would want to encourage those to locate. They have a little bit more kind of characteristics of a gas station, but there's also some synergies with other kinds of land uses, like putting a DC fast charger next to a coffee shop is a really good idea because it benefits both the drivers and the business, because you still need 20 minutes to charge your car if you're coming in and charging it from empty. And then finally, kind of this developing design standards for public circulation around those fast chargers installations, because we have seen when penetrations get high, some difficulties with that. The utility engagement question, I wanted to kind of give you an example on the joint programs with utilities on education and marketing is one of our best practices. And this is something where the utility has a program, you can encourage EV owners to register with the utility so that there can be a dialogue and an opportunity for the utility to work and provide incentives to EV owners. Host or supporting EV readiness workshops, a lot of educational barriers, as I kind of noted at the start, to help people understand what the real issues are with EVs and what is just a myth is very important to get over these market transformation issues. To collaboratively work with utilities and EVs, or utilities to promote EVs at local dealerships. A lot of times what we find is that, and this is especially true in rural places like Iowa and Minnesota, the local dealers don't actually have an inventory, and they can't sell cars if they don't have an inventory. And there are ways to work and examples of collaborative programs to make sure that dealerships actually have vehicles available so people can kind of get familiar with them. And also on where there are utility programs, to do joint promotion of those with the utility and the local government. The category of education and incentives, I wanted to kind of focus on the best practice of creating local financial incentives for charging equipment installation. And this is people will react to this by saying, oh geez, we don't have any money in the budget to provide anybody with an incentive. But the thing is that most communities already have some kind of financing or grant programs for different kinds of installations. So for instance, affordable housing. A lot of communities have a housing authority or are developing affordable housing installations. Making sure that the developers who are doing that can actually access the financing or grants that are already in your community that can include charging equipment installations at the time of construction, where it's very cheap to do so. Or similarly, a loan program you may already have for businesses for economic development reasons, make it applicable to put in charging equipment in businesses so that commercial installations can become destinations for people who want to charge. And then promoting state and federal incentives that already exist and can be a big boon, because many people may not even be aware in your community that those exist. And then the public leadership question, I wanted to talk briefly about the best practice of electrifying your public fleet. There's several specific steps that you can look at to do that. An assessment of your EV conversion opportunities. There's a company called Fleet Karma and several similar companies that can do that kind of conversion assessment. You can adopt specific EV conversion goals for your fleets with timelines, because you do need to convert those ultimately to electric, because that makes economic sense to do so. Purchasing EVs actually is the next step in that process, and then tracking EV metrics over time for your fleet. And then the final category of shared mobility, one of the best practices I wanted to focus on here is deploying electric transit or paratransit vehicles. And again, there's several steps in this. You might just want to assess the opportunities for EV transit and paratransit conversion. You know, do you have a dial-a-ride program or some kind of ride-share program? Do you have paratransit? Do you have transit systems? What is the opportunity? Merely taking the first step and assessing those things is a step toward EV readiness. And then, of course, you can take it a step further and actually develop and adopt a transition plan for those vehicles. Purchasing and deploying them is the next step, and then kind of making sure that you're just meeting those goals and tracking those goals over time. So this is just kind of some ideas about what different communities can do to be EV ready. It doesn't require you necessarily to do a lot of new program work. It's fairly simple, and especially when you talk about doing kind of EV installations at the time of construction, it is virtually cost-free. And so kind of the different kind of things that cities can do generally fall into 4 different buckets of action when you're doing market transformation. You can do encouragement to encourage people to act consistent with your EV goals. And there are several options here that are explained. You can do incentives and that have a variety of different kinds of ways to do this that don't necessarily cost money to the city, but do provide a significant incentive for change. You can take regulatory action in some cases, things that you're already doing, for instance, parking standards and new construction, and making sure you're adopting EV-ready standards within those. And then, of course, public demonstration and leadership is the 4th kind of bucket of action that you can do around public facilities and fleets and right-of-ways. So that's kind of our summary of what the EV-ready program is, and I will hand it off to the next speaker. You're going to have questions at the end?
Yeah, we're going to do questions at the end, which thanks for bringing that up, because I forgot to mention, please type your questions into the question and answer piece. And Brian, there are 2 questions for you right now if you want to answer them. One says, has the price of EV vehicles become more affordable for the average consumer?
Well, the question is that yes, it does. The purchase price has been coming down, and there are more options on the market, and there remain for some of the vehicles also federal incentives that you can take advantage of in order to bring that price down. But one of the things we do emphasize, as I kind of said earlier, is that it's important for you to look at the life cycle cost, because even though the purchase price may be higher, the fuel costs are substantially lower. It costs about 1/4 to 1/3 to run an EV vehicle on the fuel cost than it does a gasoline vehicle. And then almost more significant is the fact that the maintenance costs for EVs are substantially lower than they are for gasoline engines. There are no belts, there are no oil changes, there are no fluids. You have to do brakes and tires, and that's about it. And then there are a few other long-term mechanical components that are similar to EVs. But the maintenance cost savings in some instances are actually as great or greater than the fuel cost savings. Oh, and then the second question is about why EV owners should register with the utility. This is something that you don't need to register. There's an advantage of it when there are programs that the utility can offer the consumer, and it helps the utility understand how many EVs there are in their service territory. So there's some advantages both to developing new programs where that makes some sense, or making sure that people talk to their electric utility about the kind of incentive programs. Sometimes there are charging incentives that they will provide EV owners, or installation of charging equipment, sometimes even that they'll provide. And by talking to the utility, you become aware of those things.
Thank you, Brian. Jolene Jansen is our next speaker. She did pre-record. She had a conflict, but she will be joining later, but we're going to go ahead and show her recording of her presentation real quick here. So we will.
Project that we just completed. Listen to this video, and I'll come in at the end and hopefully talk to you a little bit more about our exciting project that we're really quite proud of. And essentially, we call the project Public EV Charging Stations here in Clayton County, and relating it to the Clayton County tourism sector. So first, a little bit about energy districts. Energy districts exist in about 12 counties here in Iowa. Or 12, there are 12 energy districts, some of them actually in Wisconsin as well. But energy districts are at the intersection of clean energy prosperity and climate stewardship. We call that intersection where green meets green. And we're all part of the Clean Energy Districts of Iowa, a network of these energy districts working at a local level. Our energy district's mission is to strengthen our communities by leading and implementing and accelerating the inclusive and local transition to clean energy use. We have two drivers for our mission. We try to positively affect, with all of our projects, the local economy by reducing the cost of energy for everyone. And we're also trying to slow climate change by promoting wise energy use. We are a nonprofit organization, and that's a list of our board members and people that are working on the energy district work here in Clayton County. Again, this is a kind of a map of where energy districts exist in Iowa. We have a universal approach. It works everywhere, but it's also local and independent of each other as far as our missions. And we all are part of this Clean Energy Districts of Iowa. So when we got started on our project and really thinking about a need for electric vehicle charging infrastructure here in Clayton County, we did so knowing that by 2025, according to autonews.com, that there will be 1/3 of all global auto sales would be electric vehicles. And we also knew that electric vehicle sales would outpace traditional internal combustion engines by 2030. In fact, as we were just kicking off our project, General Motors announced their new $7 billion investment into electric vehicle and autonomous technology, and that they would have 30 different electric vehicle makes in their offerings by 2025. We also knew that in our gorgeous Northeast Iowa driftless region, we looked at the PlugShare maps of where there are charging stations in the area. We saw a desert right here in particularly Clayton County here on the Mississippi River in Northeast Iowa, but in the whole driftless region, there weren't a lot of charging stations and opportunities. And we know that in our our tourist destination area, that if people own electric vehicles, they're not going to come to Clayton County if they can't charge their vehicles in order to return home. At the time of our project, and when we really started to propose the project, there was one electric charging station in the entire very large in land area county. It's the fourth largest in land area county in the state of Iowa. And this was the only place that you could charge an electric vehicle, not an enticing place to go, off the beaten path, out at Brown Sales and Leasing. And it's just situated there between the two service bays. So that was the only charging station in Clayton County when we started the project. It was a charging station desert. We worked on our project, did a lot of promotion of the project while we were doing it, a lot of talk about it. And since then, we now have what we think is a charging station oasis, and we'll get into where those charging stations are located here. Again, we needed to connect. We had to have some reason why we would be granted, funders would consider granting us the dollars to put these charging stations into place. So we connected the need for charging stations to Clayton County's really tremendous tourism industry. The pictures say are worth 1,000 words. This is where these charging stations are located. Clearly a tourist destination for here in Northeast Iowa. We looked at some of the numbers as well. In Strawberry Point, to the south of the southern part of Clayton County, at Highway 3 and 13, they see 2,800 cars per day at that intersection. In Elkader and Highway 13, they're seeing about 4,600 cars a day. In 2019, Clayton County had 206,000 arrivals. And Clayton County is rated second as far as having the most scenic byways in the state, next to Allen McKee County, just to our north. So there clearly are people coming to Clayton County as visitors. So the next thing we needed to do in order to secure some funding is to find some public partners. Were there cities that were willing to partner with the nonprofit Clayton County Energy District to host charging stations? And during the pandemic, we zoomed into a bunch of council meetings and pitched the project and told them that what they needed to do is we would deliver an electric vehicle charging station to them. They were going to have to provide the location for the charger. They were going to have to cover the cost to install the charger and oversee that installation. They were going to have to provide some sort of connection to the internet, whether it be Wi-Fi or cellular network. All of these charging stations are all cellular network connections, except for the one in Guttenberg. They had to accept the transfer of ownership of the charging stations and establish a host account with the charging station vendor, which we selected blank, and I'll show you why in the next slide. And that host account would transfer funds and manage chargers. So we landed on city partners in McGregor and in Marquette, in Elkader, in Guttenberg, and Strawberry Point. So this was a table of considerations that we used to analyze the various charging station vendors. We were interested in providing the most powerful level 2 chargers we could for least cost. And also when they were the most powerful chargers would charge the fastest. We know that the draw does take some time to charge a car. And so you don't want to put chargers in a place where there's nothing to do, which was also a really important factor in selecting the locations for our chargers. So Blink landed the bid for the job. We have 5 stations. We bought 5 stations at a cost of $47,000, and they charge at a rate about 65 miles an hour. A little bit more about that later. This is just an outline of the cost of the total cost of the project. The 5 dual port level 2 chargers that charge up to 19.2 kilowatts of charging capacity, and 5 years of prepaid network services cost about $60,000. That's the equipment, the network services, like I said, the project administration, and the actual city costs. And so this is how it all kind of broke down. We could talk about that in detail if somebody's interested in those numbers. Again, when I join you later live for questions. The city partners had a combined estimated cost of around $10,000 two of the cities are served by Alliant Energy and qualified for $1,500 rebates on their charging stations. And so overall, the total cost outlay for city partners spread across the 5 cities was about $10,000. So this is where these cities ended up, or these charging stations ended up. This is the mayor of Strawberry Point. They, like I said, they have a municipal utility there, and their outlay was around $620. This charging station is located just underneath the Strawberry behind City Hall on Highway 13 there in Strawberry Point, and again, a block off of Main Street. Really nice location, easy walking distance. There's a little park right joining this charging station location, and a great place to spend time while an electric vehicle owner is getting charged up. This is Elkader's site, and again, the mayor of Elkader showing us where the charging station was going to be. It happens to be sharing, it's a public parking lot across from Founders Park and across from the Turkey River, right on Main Street, and also shares, it's just the same parking lot as the grocery store as well. So a great location in Elkader. Same is true in Gothenburg. That's the mayor, our board chair, Jim Osterhaus in the center of the picture, and the economic development director. They ended up changing location, moving it closer to Riverview Drive in Gothenburg, right behind the municipal building, and they are able to use a Wi-Fi extender there, and so they're using Wi-Fi cellular data to provide the network services there. Their estimated cost was around $2,200. And a municipal utility there. In McGregor, also a public parking lot near their municipal utility building, and right off of that beautiful downtown district. And Marquette as well, underneath the bridge where there's, I don't know if any of you have ever been up here for flea market days and other things that happen in the fall, but it is in a very strategic location where all outdoor events happen. And their cost was about $4,000, but again, they're getting an Alliant Energy rebate of $1,500. So how much does it cost for a person to charge an electric vehicle, and how long? Bottom line is the ultimate cost is dependent upon what the unit price is set as. The kilowatt hour per price is set by the charging station host. Most of these city hosts have chosen a non-compete clause, or chosen to not compete with each other, and so they have gone with the Blink suggested price of 49 cents a kilowatt hour. So at 49 cents a kilowatt hour to charge a Blink, or to charge a Chevy Bolt as pictured here, it would take about $31 to fully charge it at 49 cents a kilowatt hour at $9.24 an hour. And it would take about 3.6 hours to fully charge another Chevy Bolt. We did have a couple of unexpected hassles on this project. We got started last December for delivery of these charging stations. And that was one hassle, to get a large semi down our icy gravel roads, and my personal icy long gravel lane was a little bit of a challenge, but we got it done. They sat in our storage garage for the winter. In the spring, we got them delivered out to the cities. We did have a little bit of public pushback, some misunderstanding of exactly how much it was going to cost taxpayers, which was very little, and really some understanding as to why here in Clayton County, where we're not fully realizing a lot of electric vehicles, if it was all that necessary. And it's changed completely. Our project has ended up stimulating other EV charging stations to be installed in Clayton County, and we are seeing pretty decent use of these electric vehicles. So sort of an if you build it, they will come thing, and it's worked out well. Blink is a new company and growing, and there were some communications issues as they're growing right now, and them working with a project where one entity bought 5 charging stations that was going to transfer ownership to 5 different cities in an area that they didn't have a market at all at the moment. It was just a little bit to get over at first, but we did get through it, and a lot of good communication, and I would recommend working with Blink in the future. So yeah, that's our project. Because it was consistent with our mission to make communities stronger, we decided to dream this project into existence. As implementers of the inclusive and locally owned transition to clean energy, we hope that the Upper Mississippi Gaming Corps and our city partners would see this as a project to promote the common good, and they did. So once again, I'm sorry I'm not there live. I will join you later and be glad to talk about this a little bit longer.
All right. Thank you so much, Jolene. I guess that ended rather quickly, but Jolene will be back on shortly. Our next speaker, again, please feel free to post questions in the Q&A. And our next speaker is MK Anderson from Iowa Economic Development Authority. MK, we'll turn it over to you.
All right, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, hi there. My name is MK Anderson. I am a project manager with the Iowa Energy Office, and that's located within the Iowa Economic Development Authority. And I'm also the coordinator of the Iowa Clean Cities Coalition. Today, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about work that's happening around the state, as well as some tools that are available to communities in Iowa as you continue your EV journeys. First, I wanted to give a brief overview of the Iowa Clean Cities Coalition and the status of EVs in Iowa. So the Iowa Clean Cities Coalition is part of a nationwide network of over 100 coalitions, and our mission as a whole is to create private-public partnerships to increase the adoption of alternative fuels, alternative fuel vehicles, and energy-efficient transportation systems. We do this through outreach, education, engagement, and serving as a link between project partners, as well as providing technical resources. So as of June 30th, 2021, there were over 6,000 electric vehicles registered in Iowa. And as you can see, there's a fairly even split between fully battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which is a switch from just a couple of years ago where the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles really overtook that ratio. And then currently, there are 40 public DC fast charging stations in Iowa with 68 ports. So what that means is that 68 cars can charge at one time at our stations in Iowa. And then 181 level 2 stations with 314 ports. So this year, the Iowa Energy Office has helped to fund the following 2 projects. The first is the Eastern Iowa Electric Vehicle Readiness Plan. This is a regional effort to create EV readiness plans for communities of all sizes in Eastern Iowa. This effort also includes an ongoing task force of Eastern Iowa communities that are working together to deploy EV-ready actions that were highlighted in the plan. This plan can be used as a model statewide, and if you haven't read this plan yet, I highly, highly recommend you do so. Also, this plan and all of the tools that I mentioned will be in the notes section of my presentation, which I will share with the event organizers. So the second project is the Dubuque Fleet Electrification and Renewable Energy Feasibility Study. The city of Dubuque partnered with Alliant Energy to complete a feasibility study, really looking at the possibility of electrifying the city fleet and fueling it with completely with renewable energy. As a result of the study, the city has decided to consider the cost of carbon when purchasing new vehicles and will continue to work on electrifying their fleet. So the remainder of my slides will focus on tools that are available to Iowa communities that could be useful in your EV planning. The first is the Electric Vehicle Public Charging Station Hosts Handbook. This handbook can serve as a guide to those who are wanting to own and operate a public charging station. And it includes an overview of electric vehicles, electric vehicle infrastructure, and discusses costs and benefits of owning and operating charging stations, and discusses siting needs such as accessibility, site design, signage, and future proofing. So these next group of tools all come from the Alternative Fuels Data Center. And I recommend everybody spend some time on that website. They have really excellent information about alternative fuels and alternative fuel vehicles, including electric. The first tool that I want to talk about is the Station Locator tool. So this tool provides information on all alternative fuel stations in the US and Canada, and you can filter this down by area and by fuels. This photo represents all of the EV stations in Iowa. Now you might notice that this number is quite a bit larger than the number I cited earlier. And that's because this slide includes Tesla stations, and my number on public charging stations did not, as you can only charge Tesla vehicles at these stations, so they're not technically publicly available. The next tool is the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Projection Tool, or EVI Pro Lite. So this tool provides a really simple way to estimate how much EV charging you might need in your area, and then how that could affect the utility load profile. You can search either by state or by city or urban area, and you can choose how many EVs you would like to support with this tool. The next tool is the Vehicle Cost Calculator. This tool uses basic information about your driving habits to calculate the total cost of ownership and emissions of the vehicle. And it's available for most makes and models, including alternative fuel vehicles. And it has a really helpful comparison option. So you can use the tool as an easy way to see the savings, both financial and emissions wise, of switching to an electric vehicle. This tool is targeted towards light duty vehicles, but there is an emissions calculator for heavy duty vehicles that the AFDC provides as well. Next is the Laws and Incentives database. This is a database of all federal and state alternative fuel related laws and incentives, and that includes electric vehicle rebates. And then finally, the Iowa Clean Cities Coalition. So we are definitely a tool that you can use for basically whatever you need related to electric vehicles, but some examples: we can provide education on electric vehicles and the related infrastructure. We can help you arrange electric vehicle ride and drives for your city employees that are using these vehicles. We can help provide guidance on and examples of electric vehicle related policies and programs. We can provide you information about applicable funding programs. We can also provide a fleet analysis where we look at the fleet as a whole and determine the total cost of ownership and emissions profile of that fleet, and then show you what that would look like if you were to transition to using alternative fuels. And finally, we can serve as a technical resource for any alternative fuel related questions you might have, as well as a link between project partners. So thank you so much for having me. Here is my contact information, and I think it's time for questions.
All right, thank you so much, MK. All right, if people have questions, go ahead and put your questions into the chat, and we will into the question and answer part. So we have one question. It says for Jolene. I'm not sure if Jolene or MK probably can answer this. Is the person was thinking that they thought cities could not charge directly for EV charging, that they can only charge for use of the space, as they might charge for a parking space. Does the contract with Blink somehow eliminate that issue? Also, were the cities involved in the bid process, or did CCD handle that by itself?
Okay, so on the going in reverse order on the bid process, we did not involve the cities in choosing which vendor we were going to purchase the stations from, and the reason for that is we were limited by the amount of money that we had, and the only thing that we were working on was to provide the most powerful charging station that we could at a level 2 charger, and also that would be at least cost. So no, they weren't a part of that. We did promise them that it would be a level 2 charger, and those two things, that it would be as the most powerful charger we could buy within the amount of the funds that we had, that we were proposing. And the first question was about whether or not those chargers, the cities could actually collect on those as revenue generators. I don't think that there was anything in Iowa that does prevent a non-taxable entity or a city, a local unit of government, from using those chargers as revenue generators. they're not going to be serious revenue generators for them. And it is up to them if they'd like to just give away the cost. But I don't think that there's anything that keeps them from doing that in the state of Iowa. But maybe somebody else on the call knows differently. Right now, they all are charging for them.
The next question on here is, could someone speak to the apparent preference for networked over non-network chargers? Non-network chargers are lucrative to EV owners and don't require an internet connection. However, payment can't be collected as far as I know. But they're wondering if it's also cheaper to operate that way. So I don't know if MK or in Iowa, there's a little twist there. So MK, Jolene, maybe Brian, you know that.
Well, I can speak generally to that, but if there's an Iowa specific answer, I'll defer first to that.
I would just say that it goes to use. For example, Blink is really the vendor that we selected. They're interested in having a kilowatt hour unit price on their systems because that's part of their selling factor. Obviously, they want to sell something that has a potential as a revenue generator for their customers. That's enticing, and that's how they're able to sell them. But as far as if they don't get networked and just give away the power, there's no way of tracking it if they're not networked. And if they just give them away, that would be different. Like an employer situation or something like that would make sense.
One benefit of a network charger that many people miss out on is the fact that if you have a charger that is capable of being networked, is a charger that you can manage in terms of your electric costs. EV chargers, level 2 EV chargers are, several years ago they were about 6 or 7 kW power that was drawn at any given point in time when the car was operating fully. That has gone up to 9 to 11, and we're seeing level 2 chargers that are at 15 kW. What that does is that if you're getting charged a commercial energy rate, you're paying a demand charge, and you are paid, and that is a big cost component of the cost of charging is that demand charge. If you have a managed charger, a network charger, you can manage it so that you can minimize that demand charge to make sure that if you have a couple of different EV chargers, it will be substantially lower cost to the facility that is hosting them than not. I would never recommend a non-network charger, especially in a public location that's being hosted by a government entity. There are a few places where a non-network charger might make sense, but generally the marginal cost of a networking the charger is going to be paid for if you utilize that in the cost savings you can get. The other thing about a network charger, or what we would call smart chargers that can be managed, is that even if you're not concerned about the electric costs, the electric code deals with a managed charging situation differently than a non-managed. The electric code requires a non-managed kind of what we call a dumb charger to be assumed that it's going to be continuously in operation. And so you have to have an electric panel and transformers sufficient to accommodate continuous operation. The electric code allows you, for a smart charger, to assume that you're not going to have continuous operation, which means that the other infrastructure costs that you might face, either at your facility or at the electric utility, can be lower than what you would face otherwise. So again, managed charging is really the way to go. And this is something that we're still kind of getting people to understand and acknowledge, because the kind of cascading downstream costs of a managed versus non-managed charger rarely gets taken into account when people are making that decision. And it is an important decision to make, and we would recommend kind of in most cases that a smart charger is going to be the way to go.
Thank you. The next question is, will there be an increase in the amount of funding available to cities to utilize EV infrastructure in the federal infrastructure package?
Yes. That's the quick question, quick answer. There is substantial funding in the federal bills that are being looked at to support EV build out and EV network build out. How that is going to come into play, however, is still, the devil's in the details, right? But in all likelihood, there will be opportunities, substantial opportunities, to take advantage of that funding to build out EV infrastructure.
Great, thank you. Any other questions that folks have right now? Otherwise, I am going to share my screen. So as we mentioned, we're going to be doing, there we go. This is part of a series of webinars, and if folks have additional topics they're interested in, please go ahead and put that in, mark that into the question and answer, or feel free to email us. The next webinar that's coming up, the date actually is not February 9th. It's going to be in February, but the next webinar will be comprehensive planning with a climate and sustainability lens, really focused on all the steps from submitting an RFP to kind of what you need to look at to make sure your comprehensive plan matches up with climate and sustainability goals. I also want to just put out there that the 1000 Friends of Iowa Best Development Award nominations are still open until the 18th of November. The nominations are for sustainable projects in the state of Iowa under 12 different categories, including things like mixed use, renewable energy, stormwater, renovated civic, new civic projects, transportation, and more. There's a link there if anybody is interested for more information or entries. Otherwise, if there are no other questions, I want to thank you guys all for being here. And once again, thank Brian, Jolene, and MK for presenting for us. We will make available the slides, and this webinar has been recorded, so we'll also share the recording. And this was, for those of you that this matters to, this was, you are getting CM credits for this through APA Iowa. So thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars.